Marcus Chen opened his eyes slowly as bright lights burned into his vision and made him squint hard against the pain that shot through his skull like lightning bolts. His whole body felt like someone had used it as a punching bag for several hours straight without stopping once. The last thing he remembered clearly was the explosion that had ripped through the command deck of the Krathix warship and the way the floor had rushed up to meet his face as debris flew everywhere, around him in a deadly storm of metal and fire. He tried to sit up, but his muscles screamed in protest at the movement. A medical drone hummed quietly near his head and injected something cool into his arm that made the pain fade to a dull ache that he could at least tolerate without wanting to scream. The sterile smell of the medical bay filled his nose as he finally managed to push himself up onto his elbows and look around at his surroundings with confusion written all over his face. "Easy, soldier," a voice said from somewhere to his left. Marcus turned his pounding head to see Dr. Yavish standing there with her forearms crossed over her chest. The Krallian doctor looked tired, but relieved as she approached his bed with slow, careful steps. "You have been unconscious for 3 standard days after the battle. Your injuries were extensive, but you will make a full recovery given time and rest." The battle, Marcus croaked out through his dry throat that felt like sandpaper. "Did we win? What happened to the Scarix fleet?" "You destroyed their flagship," Yavish said with something that might have been admiration in her voice. "Your actions saved the entire Krathix defense fleet, and quite possibly the colony below. High Commander Vortok has declared you a hero of the Empire and granted you many honors for your brave service." Marcus wanted to laugh at that, but his ribs hurt too much for such movements. He had just been doing his job as part of the human military advisory unit attached to the Krathix forces. When the Scarix had launched their surprise attack, he had simply reacted on instinct and training like any good soldier would have done in his position. He did not feel like much of a hero right now, as he lay in a hospital bed feeling like death warmed over. "That is very kind of the High Commander," Marcus said carefully, as he knew enough about Krathix culture to understand that refusing honors could be seen as a grave insult to their pride. "I was just doing my duty like any soldier would have done in that situation." "The Krathix do not see it that way," Yavish replied as her orange eyes studied him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "They have prepared many rewards for you as befits a warrior of your caliber and courage. You should rest now because tomorrow you will be moved to your new quarters in the palace complex where you can recover in comfort."
Something
about the way she said that last part made alarm bells ring in the back of Marcus's mind, but before he could ask any questions, the doctor had already turned away and walked back to her station to check on other patients in the ward. Marcus lay back down against the pillows, feeling uneasy about what kind of rewards the Krathix might have prepared for him without his knowledge or consent. The next day came far too quickly as medical drones helped Marcus get dressed in fresh clothes and escorted him through the massive corridors of the Krathix military complex toward his new quarters. His legs still felt weak, but he managed to walk without assistance even though every step sent small jolts of pain through his healing body. The guards who accompanied him said nothing during the entire journey, but kept glancing at him with expressions he could not quite read on their alien faces. When they finally reached his assigned quarters and the door slid open with a quiet hiss, Marcus stepped inside, expecting to find a simple room with a bed and basic furniture. Instead, he found himself standing in what looked like a luxury apartment with expensive decorations covering every surface and soft lighting that created a warm atmosphere throughout the space. But none of that mattered because his attention immediately locked onto the figure kneeling in the center of the main room with her head bowed low toward the floor. She was humanoid in shape, but clearly not human, with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer slightly in the light and long silver hair that fell like a waterfall down her back to pool on the floor around her knees. Delicate features marked her face, which might have been beautiful if not for the expression of absolute terror that twisted her lips and made her whole body tremble like a leaf in a strong wind. Around her neck was a thick metal collar that gleamed under the lights and connected 2 matching shackles on her wrists and ankles by thin, glowing chains that hummed with some kind of energy field. She wore simple white clothing that marked her status as clearly as if someone had painted the word across her forehead in bright red. Letters slave. Marcus felt his stomach drop toward his feet as the full horror of the situation crashed over him like a tidal wave. The guards behind him stepped forward, and one of them spoke in the Krathix language through his translator device. "This is Lyra, of the Velkari people. She is gifted to you by High Commander Vortek himself, as reward for your heroic service to the Empire. She is skilled in engineering and many other useful tasks. The control collar is biometrically bonded to your genetic signature, so only you can command her or grant her freedom. She is yours to do with as you please, Warrior Chen." The words hit Marcus like physical blows as his mind reeled from what he was hearing. They had given him a person as property, a living, breathing, sentient being who was now legally his possession, according to Krathix law and custom. He looked down at Lyra, who still had not raised her head, or made any sound beyond the quiet, ragged breathing that spoke of barely controlled panic. "This is a mistake," Marcus said quickly as he turned to face the guards with his hands raised in a gesture of refusal. "I cannot accept this gift. Please tell the High Commander that I am honored, but this is not appropriate. I don't want a slave." The guards looked at each other with confusion written clearly across their scaled faces. One of them tilted his head in that way Krathix did when they encountered something completely outside their understanding of proper behavior. To refuse such a gift would be the gravest of insults to High Commander Vortok. The guard said slowly, as if explaining something to a small child who did not understand how the world worked. "Lyra is one of the most valuable slaves in the Empire due to her technical skills. The High Commander honors you greatly by giving her to you. You cannot refuse without causing serious diplomatic incident between your people and ours." Aus felt trapped as the weight of the situation pressed down on his shoulders like a mountain. If he refused, he could damage the fragile alliance between humanity and the Krathix Empire at a time when they desperately needed each other to face external threats. But if he accepted, he became a slave owner, which went against everything he believed in and everything humanity stood for in the galaxy. The guards left him. Alone with Lyra still kneeling silently in the center of the room, Marcus stood frozen for a long moment before he finally moved toward her and crouched down despite the pain in his ribs so he could try to see her face. "Lyra," he said softly, "please look at me." She raised her head slowly, and Marcus found himself staring into eyes that were a deep violet color, filled with such fear and resignation that it made his heart ache in his chest. She had clearly been through this before with other masters, and expected only pain from this new human who now owned her. "I need you to understand something very important," Marcus said, as he kept his voice gentle and non-threatening. "I am not going to hurt you, and I am not going to treat you like property. I don't believe in slavery, and I am going to find a way to free you from these chains. But I need your help to do it, because I don't understand how this technology works." Lyra stared at him for a long moment, and Marcus could see the conflict playing across her expressive features as she tried to determine if he was telling the truth or simply playing some cruel game with her emotions. Finally, she spoke in a voice that was barely above a whisper. "Masters always say kind words at first," she said with bitterness, coding every syllable. "Then they show their true nature once the slave believes the lies." "I know you have no reason to trust me," Marcus replied as he sat down fully on the floor in front of her to put them at the same eye level. "But I am asking you to give me a chance to prove that not all masters are the same. Humans don't believe anyone should be property. We fought wars against slavery on our own world, and we won't accept it here either. So please help me understand these chains, and we will break them together. That is my promise to you." For the first time since Marcus had entered the room, he saw something other than fear flicker through Lyra's violet eyes. It was small and fragile and quickly hidden, but it had been there for just a moment. Hope. Hash the human soldier woke up to find his unexpected. Rewarda beautiful alien slave Hash Part 2. Breaking chains. Building trust. The morning sun filtered through the windows of Marcus's quarters, casting long shadows across the floor where he had spent most of the nights sitting with his back against the wall, just watching Lyra sleep on the bed he had insisted she take, while he refused to even consider using it himself. She had protested at first, saying that slaves did not sleep in masters' beds, but Marcus had been firm in his insistence that he was not her master and would never claim to be such. A terrible thing. He had barely slept more than a few hours. As his mind raced through possibilities and plans for how to remove the collar and chains that bound Lyra to him through technology he did not fully understand yet. The Krathic systems were sophisticated, and the biometric lock meant that only his genetic signature could authorize commands to the controlled device or grant freedom to the wearer. It was elegant in its cruelty, and Marcus hated every aspect of the design with a burning passion that surprised him with its intensity. Lyra stirred as consciousness returned. To her, and Marcus watched as confusion crossed her features for a moment before memory crashed back and her whole body tensed like a bowstring pulled tight. She sat up quickly, and her violet eyes scanned the room until they found Marcus sitting against the wall, and something like relief flickered across her face before being quickly hidden behind the blank mask she wore so well. "I did not," she started to say, then stopped herself, as if the words were too dangerous to speak aloud, in case they invited punishment. "Would not hurt you," Marcus said gently as he pushed himself to his feet with a grunt of effort. His body still ached from his injuries, but he was healing quickly thanks to the medical treatments. "I meant what I said last night about finding a way to free you from those chains. I was hoping you might be willing to help me understand how the collar system works, since you said you have engineering skills." Lyra stared at him for a long moment with those impossibly deep violet eyes that seemed to see right through him to the core of who he was as a person. Finally, she nodded slowly and spoke in that soft voice that made Marcus have to strain slightly to hear her words. "The collar uses quantum encryption tied to your specific genetic markers," she explained as her fingers unconsciously moved to touch the metal band around her neck. "It reads your DNA signature and compares it against the authorization matrix stored in the device memory. Only a match at 99.9% accuracy will allow commands to be processed or freedom protocols to be initiated. So I just need to order it to release you," Marcus said with hope rising in his chest at the seemingly simple solution. "It is not that easy," Lyra replied, and now there was something sad in her voice. "The collar also monitors my vital signs constantly, and if it detects that I have been freed, it sends an alert to the Central Krathic Slave Registry. Within minutes, guards would arrive to recapture. Me and you would face charges of illegal slave liberation, which carries severe penalties, including possible execution under Krathic's law." Marcus felt his hope deflate like a punctured balloon as the full complexity of the situation became clear to him. The Krathics had designed their slave system to be almost impossible to break without serious consequences for everyone involved. It was not enough to simply remove the physical restraints because the digital leash extended far beyond what could be seen with eyes alone. "There has to be a way," Marcus said with determination hardening his voice. "No system is perfect, and every security protocol has weaknesses that can be exploited by someone who knows what they are looking for. You said you were an engineer before they enslaved you, right? What did you work on?" Lyra hesitated for a moment, and Marcus could see her internal debate written clearly on her expressive features. She was deciding whether to trust him with information that could be dangerous in the wrong hands. Finally, she seemed to come to some conclusion, and began to speak with more confidence than Marcus had heard from her. "Before, I designed weapons systems for the Velkari Defense Forces, before my world fell to the Krathics. Invasion," she said, and there was old pain in her words. "They kept me alive because my knowledge was valuable to them, and they forced me to work on improving their technology. By threatening to kill others of my people who had also been captured, I helped build the very weapons they now use to conquer other worlds, and that guilt weighs on me every single day I continue to breathe." Marcus felt his anger toward the Krathic system grow even stronger as he listened to Lyra's story. They had not just enslaved her body, but had twisted her skills and knowledge to serve their empire of conquest and oppression. It was cruel beyond measure and made him more determined than ever to find a way to break her free from these chains that bound her. "Then you understand their systems better than almost anyone," Marcus said as he moved closer to where Lyra sat on the edge of the bed. "If anyone can find the weakness in the collar technology, it would be someone who has worked with Krathik's systems from the inside. Will you help me try to hack it? If we are caught attempting to tamper with the collar, they will kill us both," Lyra warned him, with real fear evident in her voice. "The Krathiks do not tolerate any threats to their slave systems, because they know their entire empire would collapse if their labor force was suddenly freed." "I know the risks," Marcus replied calmly. "But I also know that doing nothing means accepting that you remain property for the rest of your life, and I refuse to allow that to happen if there is any chance at all to change it. So I am asking you again, Lyra, will you help me, or do you want to stay a slave forever?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that went far beyond simple words. Marcus watched as Lyra processed what he was really asking her, which was whether she still had any fight left inside her spirit, or whether years of slavery had finally broken something fundamental in her soul that could never be repaired. Then Lyra lifted her chin slightly, and Marcus saw fire kindle in those violet eyes that had seemed so dead and hopeless just a day before, when he had first found her kneeling on his floor. When she spoke, her voice was stronger and more clear than it had been since they met. "I will help you," she said with certainty, "but we will need equipment and privacy to work without being observed by Krathik surveillance systems. Your quarters are monitored constantly, so we cannot do anything here without being detected immediately." Nodded and began to pace back and forth across the room as his military training kicked in and started analyzing the tactical situation they faced. He needed to find a way to get them both to a secure location where they could work on the collar without alerting the Krathik's authorities to what they were attempting to accomplish. "I'm still officially recovering from my injuries," Marcus said as the beginnings of a plan formed in his mind. "I can request access to the human medical facilities on the station instead of continuing treatment in the Krathik section. That would give us some space away from their direct monitoring, and I know our doctors would be sympathetic to the situation. Once I explained it to them, the Krathiks will be suspicious. If you suddenly want to change your medical care," Lyra pointed out with worry creasing her forehead, "they will wonder what you are trying to hide from their observation." "Let me worry about managing the Krathiks," Marcus said, with more confidence than he actually felt. "Right now I need you to tell me exactly what kind of equipment and tools you will need to attempt hacking the collar system once we have a secure location to work." And Lyra began to list off various technical components and devices that Marcus did not fully understand, but he memorized each item carefully so he could acquire them through proper channels without raising suspicion about their true purpose. As she spoke, Marcus noticed that her posture had changed subtly, and she no longer held herself with the defeated slump of someone who had given up all hope for a better future. The next several days passed in careful preparation. As Marcus laid the groundwork for their escape attempt, he filed official requests with the human medical staff for continued treatment, which were quickly approved since the Krathiks had no reason to deny such reasonable requests from their honored human hero. He also began quietly acquiring the tools and components that Lyra had specified she would need, though he had to be creative in his explanations for why he needed certain items. During this time, Marcus also began to notice something disturbing about how other Krathiks officers treated him when they saw him with Lyra following behind him as protocol demanded she do. They looked at him with expressions that ranged from approval to something darker that made his skin crawl with disgust. Some even made comments that his translator barely managed to render into something he could understand, but the intent was clear enough that Marcus had to fight to control his anger. "Think you are breaking me improperly," Lyra explained quietly one evening after a particularly unpleasant encounter with a Krathik's commander who had made crude suggestions about training techniques. "New slaves are expected to resist at first, but experienced masters know how to crush that resistance quickly and thoroughly. They believe you are doing this in your quarters every night. Marcus felt physically sick at the implications of what Lyra was describing to him. The casual acceptance of such horror as normal and proper behavior made him understand just how deep the rot went in Krathik's culture and society. This was not just a few bad individuals, but rather an entire civilization built on the suffering of those they considered lesser beings. "I am sorry you have to endure their assumptions," Marcus said with genuine regret in his voice. "Once we break that collar off your neck, we are going to make sure the truth about their slave system gets exposed to the entire galaxy." "That is a dream too large to hope for," Lyra replied, but Marcus could hear the smallest hint of possibility creeping into her words. The Krathik's empire is vast and powerful, with connections throughout the Galactic Council. Who would believe the testimony of one escaped slave and a human soldier against their official narrative? "We will find allies," Marcus promised her with determination. "There have to be others who see the evil in this system and want to change it. We just need to find them and give them the proof they need to act." Finally, the day arrived when Marcus had arranged everything they needed for their attempt. He escorted Lyra to the human medical section, as if it were just another routine visit, and the Krathik's guards at the checkpoint waved him through without any special interest. Since Marcus had been making these trips regularly for days now, once inside the secure human facility, Marcus led Lyra to a private room that Dr. Sarah Williams had prepared for them. The older woman had listened to Marcus's explanation with growing horror and then, without hesitation, had agreed to help in any way she could because, as she put it, no human worth. The name would stand by while slavery continued to exist anywhere in the galaxy. "I have disabled all monitoring equipment in this room," Dr. Williams said as she handed Marcus a case containing the tools Lyra had requested. "You have approximately 4 hours before anyone will notice the gap in the surveillance records, so work quickly and carefully." Lyra opened the case. With hands that trembled slightly from nervousness or perhaps anticipation, and began laying out the various devices and components on the medical table. Marcus watched as she worked with a focus and intensity that spoke of years of training and experience in technical fields. Her fingers moved with practiced precision as she assembled what looked like some kind of scanning device from the various parts. "The collar has multiple redundant systems," Lyra explained as she worked. "We need to map all of them before we can attempt any kind of bypass or override. This scanner will let me see the full architecture of the control systems without triggering any alarms." She activated the device and held it near the collar around her neck. Holographic displays sprang to life, showing complex diagrams and data streams that Marcus could barely begin to comprehend. Lyra studied them with intense concentration, and Marcus saw her expression shift from focus to surprise to something that looked almost like excitement. "What is it?" Marcus asked when he could no longer contain his curiosity. "The quantum encryption is incredibly sophisticated," Lyra said slowly. "But the slave registry connection uses standard communication protocols that I recognize from my weapons work. They never bothered to upgrade that part of the system because they never thought anyone would try to hack it from the inside while still bonded." "Can you break it?" Marcus pressed. Lyra looked up at him, and for the first time since they had met, Marcus saw a genuine smile cross her delicate features and transform her entire appearance into something that took his breath away with its beauty and hope. "Yes," she said simply. "I can break it. We are going to be free." The human soldier woke up to find his unexpected reward, a beautiful alien slave. Part 3, The Price of Freedom. The collar fell from Lyra's neck with a soft click that sounded impossibly loud in the quiet medical room, and Marcus watched as she raised shaking hands to touch the bare skin where metal had pressed against her flesh for so many years of captivity and suffering. Tears streamed down her blue cheeks, leaving wet trails that caught the light as she took a deep, shuddering breath that seemed to come from the very depths of her soul, finally released from invisible chains. "It worked," she whispered in a voice filled with wonder and disbelief. "I am actually free." Marcus felt his own eyes burning with emotion as he witnessed this moment of liberation, but he forced himself to focus on the practical realities of their situation because freedom meant nothing if they could not protect it from those who would seek to reclaim what they considered stolen property. Dr. Williams stood by the door, keeping watch through a small window to ensure no one interrupted them during this critical time, of maybe 30 minutes before the slave registry notices that your caller has been deactivated, Marcus said urgently. We need to move quickly and get you somewhere safe before the Krathix authorities figure out what happened here. But even as Marcus spoke those words, the door suddenly burst open with explosive force that sent Dr. Williams stumbling backward in surprise and shock. Krathix guards poured into the room with weapons drawn and pointed directly at Marcus and Lyra, while alarms began blaring throughout the entire medical facility with ear-splitting volume that made thinking almost impossible. Step away from the slave, the lead guard commanded in harsh tones that left no room for argument or negotiation. You are under arrest for illegal tampering with Krathix property in violation of slave protocols. Both of you will be detained immediately. Marcus moved to place himself between the guards and Lyra on pure instinct, even though he knew his wounded body was no match for armed Krathix soldiers in their prime. His mind raced, trying to find some way out of this situation that did not end with both of them dead or worse, but the tactical reality was that they were trapped in a room with no other exits and facing overwhelming force is not property, Marcus said firmly, despite the weapons pointed at his chest. Slavery is wrong, and I refuse to participate in a system built on the suffering of sentient beings. If you want to arrest someone, then arrest me, but let Lyra go. Free. The guard's lipless mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile if it had contained any warmth or humor instead of cold contempt. You humans are all fools who do not understand how the galaxy truly works. The strong dominate the weak, and that is the natural order that has existed since the dawn of time itself. Your species will learn this lesson eventually, or you will be crushed beneath the wheels of progress a bit. Before the situation could escalate further, another voice cut through the tension like a knife through soft butter. Lower your weapons immediately. Everyone turned to see Captain Jennifer Rodriguez of the Human Diplomatic Corps standing in the doorway with her own security team flanking her on both sides. She carried herself with an authority that commanded respect even from the Krathix guards who hesitated for just a moment before slowly beginning to lower their weapons in response to her presence and obvious rank. This is a human medical facility, which makes it sovereign human territory under the terms of the Alliance Treaty, Captain Rodriguez said in a voice that was calm but carried steel beneath the surface. You have no legal jurisdiction here, and I am formally ordering you to leave these premises immediately before this becomes a serious diplomatic incident. Krathix guard commander's scales rippled with barely controlled anger, but Marcus could see the calculation happening behind those alien eyes as the soldier weighed his orders against the political consequences of starting a conflict with humanity over one escaped slave. No matter how valuable she might be to the Empire, the human soldier has stolen property belonging to High Commander Vortak himself, the guard said, with careful emphasis on each word. Surely even you can see that this crime cannot be ignored or swept away with diplomatic language and treaty technicalities. Humans do not recognize the legal concept of sentient beings as property, Captain Rodriguez replied without backing down even a single centimeter. What you call theft, we call liberation, and it falls completely within the moral and ethical framework that guides all human actions in galactic affairs. I suggest you take this matter up through proper diplomatic channels, rather than attempting to arrest our personnel on human territory. Standoff lasted for several more tense seconds that felt like ours stretching into eternity before the Krathix guard finally made a sharp gesture to his troops, and they began filing out of the medical room with obvious reluctance and anger radiating from every movement. But just before leaving, the commander turned back to fix Marcus with a stare that promised this confrontation was far from over. You have made a powerful enemy today, human, the guard said softly. High Commander Vortak does not forget insults, and he does not forgive those who steal from him. Your people may protect you now, but eventually you will have to leave human territory, and when you do, we will be waiting. Then they were gone, leaving behind only silence broken by the sound of Marcus releasing a breath he had not realized he was holding trapped in his lungs. Captain Rodriguez approached him with an expression that mixed relief with concern and perhaps a touch of respect for what he had attempted, despite the dangerous consequences. Was incredibly stupid and incredibly brave, she said bluntly. You have just created a major diplomatic crisis between humanity and one of our most important military allies in this sector. High Commander Vortak will demand your extradition to face Krathik's justice, and the political pressure on our government to comply will be enormous. I know, Marcus admitted quietly, but I could not just stand by and do nothing while another person suffered in slavery. That goes against everything we are supposed to represent as humans in this galaxy. Captain Rodriguez studied him for a long moment and then shifted her gaze to Lyra, who stood silent and watching with those deep, violet eyes that had seen far too much suffering for one lifetime. Something passed across the captain's face that might have been understanding, or perhaps recognition of a kindred spirit who also believed in fighting for what was right regardless of personal cost. We have a bigger problem, Lyra said suddenly, and everyone turned to look at her with surprise, since she had been so quiet up until now. While I was hacking my own collar, I discovered something in the Krathik's slave registry system that you all need to know about immediately. She moved to the medical computer and began pulling up files and data streams. With the ease of someone who had spent years working with similar systems, Marcus watched as screens filled with technical specifications and project files that seemed to be related to some kind of weapons development program that was classified at the highest levels of Krathik security. The Krathiks had been using slave engineers like myself to build something they call Project Terminus, Lyra explained as her fingers flew across the controls, bringing up more and more damning evidence. It is a weapon unlike anything seen before in the galaxy, capable of destroying entire star systems by triggering artificial supernovas in target suns. They plan to use it as leverage to force all the other council races into submission or face complete annihilation. Marcus felt his blood run cold as the full implications of what Lyra was revealing crashed over him like an avalanche of terrible possibilities. If the Krathiks had truly developed such a weapon, then the fragile balance of power that kept the various galactic civilizations from open warfare would be shattered completely. It could hold the entire galaxy hostage and demand whatever they wanted, with the threat of unimaginable destruction hanging over everyone's heads, like a sword suspended by the thinnest of threads. How close are they to completion? Captain Rodriguez demanded as she leaned in to study the data with intense focus. According to these files, the weapon is already 90% complete, Lyra said grimly. They're using slave labor on a hidden station somewhere in the outer reaches to finish the final assembly and testing. Once it becomes operational, the Krathiks will be unstoppable, and they will reshape the entire galactic order according to their vision of might makes right. We need to get this information to Earth Command immediately, Marcus said, as his military training took over and began analyzing the strategic situation. The Alliance Council has to know what the Krathiks are planning before it is too late to stop them. But even as he spoke those words, Marcus saw Dr. Williams' face go pale as she looked at something on her own medical scanner with growing horror. She raised the device to show everyone what she had discovered, and Marcus felt his stomach sink toward his feet when he understood what the readings meant. The slave registry has flagged Lyra's collar deactivation and sent out a priority alert to all Krathik security forces in this entire sector, Dr. Williams said with barely controlled panic in her voice. They are mobilizing everything they have to recapture her and arrest anyone who helped her escape. We have maybe an hour before this entire station is locked down under Krathik's martial law. Captain Rodriguez began issuing rapid orders to her security team through her CUM device while simultaneously pulling up star charts and navigation data on the medical computer. We need to get you both off this station right now before the Krathiks close all the docking bays and trap us here. I have a diplomatic courier ship that can get you to neutral space, but after that you are on your own. What about Project Terminus? Marcus protested. We cannot just run away while the Krathiks prepare to enslave the entire galaxy with that weapon. Cannot do anything about that weapon if you are dead or locked in a Krathik's prison cell. Captain Rodriguez shot back with harsh logic. Right. Now your only priority is survival, so you can get this information to people who have the resources and authority to act on it. Earth Command needs to know what we are facing. Lyra suddenly grabbed Marcus's arm with surprising strength, and when he looked into her violet eyes, he saw determination burning there, like a star-going supernova. The files I accessed included partial coordinates for the weapons construction site. If we can make it to the underground, they might be able to help us find the exact location and figure out how to destroy it before the Krathiks can complete their doomsday machine. The underground, Marcus repeated with confusion, since he had never heard that term before in any of his briefings. The escaped slave network, Lyra explained quickly. Thousands of freed slaves from dozens of different species all working together to help others escape and to undermine the Krathiks' empire from within. I had heard rumors of their existence, but I never dared hope they were real until now. If anyone can help us stop Project Terminus, it will be them. Captain. Rodriguez looked between Marcus and Lyra, and then made a decision that Marcus could see cost her greatly in terms of her career and possibly her freedom. Fine. I will get you to the coordinates for the nearest underground contact point that our intelligence services know about. But understand this clearly, both of you, once you leave this station, you will be branded as fugitives and traitors by the Krathiks Empire. They will hunt you across every system, and they will not stop until they have captured you or killed you. Are you absolutely certain you want to go down this road? Marcus looked at Lyra and saw his own determination reflected back at him in those alien eyes that had come to mean so much to him in such a short time. They had started this journey with him trying to save her from slavery, but somewhere along the way, it had become something much bigger than just one person's freedom. Now they were fighting for the future of the entire galaxy against an empire that would crush anyone who stood in their path toward total domination. We are certain, Marcus and Lyra said together in perfect unison. Captain Rodriguez nodded once, and then began moving with military efficiency toward the door. Then we need to go right now, before this window of opportunity closes forever.
Oh.
Stay close to my team and do exactly what I say, without question or hesitation. Your lives depend on it. They ran through corridors filled with chaos as alarms continued. 2 Blair and Krathik soldiers began flooding into the human sections of the station in violation of every treaty and diplomatic protocol. Marcus's healing body protested the exertion, but he pushed through the pain, 'cause stopping meant capture, and capture meant the end of everything they were fighting for. They reached the docking bay, where Captain Rodriguez's courier ship waited, with engines already warming up for immediate departure. But as they approached the boarding ramp, Marcus saw Krathik's troops moving to block their path with weapons raised and faces twisted in rage at this brazen escape attempt happening right under their watchful eyes. Go, Captain Rodriguez shouted, as she and her security team opened fire to provide covering fire. Get on that ship and do not look back, no matter what happens here. Marcus grabbed Lyra's hand, and together they sprinted up the boarding ramp as energy bolts sizzled through the air around them like angry hornets seeking blood. The ship's pilot did not wait for the ramp to fully retract before engaging the engines and launching them out of the docking bay at dangerous speeds that pushed them both to the floor under the crushing weight of acceleration. Through the viewport, Marcus watched as the station fell away behind them, and Krathik's patrol ships began scrambling to intercept. But the diplomatic courier had been designed for speed above all else, and within seconds they had jumped 2 faster than light travel, leaving their pursuers far behind in normal space. They were free, but they were also alone and hunted by an empire that controlled vast resources and had very long memories for those who defied their authority. The price of freedom was proving to be higher than Marcus had ever imagined when he first found Lyra kneeling in his quarters just days ago. But as he looked at her sitting beside him with those violet eyes full of hope and determination, Marcus knew without any doubt that he would pay that price gladly for as long as it took to see justice prevail over tyranny in this galaxy. They now had to navigate as fugitives, fighting for survival and the truth. The human soldier woke up to find his unexpected reward, a beautiful alien slave, Part 4. Allies in unexpected places, the coordinates captain. Rodriguez had given them led to a seemingly empty sector of space far beyond the normal trade routes, where stars were sparse and sensor readings showed nothing but cosmic dust and debris from ancient collisions. Marcus sat in the pilot's seat of the small courier ship, watching the navigation displays with growing concern as fuel reserves dropped lower with each passing hour while they searched for any sign of the underground network Lyra had told him about. "Are you certain we are in the right location?" Marcus asked for, perhaps the 10th time, as his anxiety about their situation continued to grow. They had been running for 3 days straight, with Krathik's hunter ships always just a few jumps behind. Them and their supplies were running dangerously low on everything from food to oxygen reserves. "The coordinates are correct," Lyra replied from the co-pilot seat where she had been monitoring communication frequencies, looking for any kind of signal that might indicate a hidden presence in this empty void. The underground would not make their locations obvious or easy to find, because that would defeat the entire purpose of staying hidden from Krathik surveillance networks. Marcus was about to respond when suddenly the ship's proximity alarms began screaming warnings that made his heart leap into his throat. Multiple contacts had appeared on sensors surrounding their position from all directions at once, and Marcus realized with growing dread that they had flown directly into some kind of trap that would be impossible to escape from. "This is Underground Station Haven calling unknown vessel." A voice crackled over the communication system in heavily accented standard that mixed at least 3 different linguistic patterns together. "We're surrounded by defensive platforms, and one wrong move will result in your immediate destruction. State your identification and purpose for entering our protected space." Marcus exchanged a quick glance with Lyra before activating the communication channel with hands that trembled slightly from relief mixed with lingering fear. "This is Marcus Chen, former human military advisor to the Krathik's forces traveling with Lyra of the Valkyrie people. We are seeking refuge with the underground, and we have critical information about a Krathik's weapon that threatens the entire galaxy." Silence stretched across the void for several long seconds that felt like an eternity before the voice returned, sounding slightly less hostile, but still cautious and wary. "Lyra of the Valkyrie, we have heard stories of a slave engineer who helped build Krathik's weapons, but never thought we would meet the legend herself. Why should we trust that you are not leading Krathik's forces directly to our hidden sanctuary? Because I just spent the last 3 days running from those same forces after escaping slavery with Marcus's help." Lyra responded with an edge of frustration in her voice. "I have nowhere else to go, and neither does he now that the Krathiks have branded us both as fugitives. We need allies, and from what I understand, the underground needs information about Krathik's military projects. Perhaps we can help each other." Another pause, followed by sounds of muted conversation happening on the other end of the communication line. Then finally the voice returned with instructions that Marcus immediately began following. "You are cleared for docking at Haven Station Base 7. Reduce speed to minimum and follow the navigation beacon that is now being transmitted to your ship. Any deviation from the designated flight path will be interpreted as hostile action. Welcome to the underground." The navigation beacon appeared on their sensors, and Marcus carefully adjusted their course to match it while watching in amazement as the seemingly empty space around them began to shimmer and shift like a mirage, fading away. What had appeared to be nothing but cosmic dust revealed itself to be an enormous station constructed from salvaged ship parts and asteroids, all held together in a chaotic but somehow functional configuration that reminded Marcus of a massive sculpture made from the debris of 1,000 different civilizations. "Stealth field technology," Lyra breathed with obvious admiration coloring her words. "I have seen Krathik's versions, but nothing on this scale or sophistication level. The underground has resources and capabilities far beyond what anyone suspected." Marcus guided their ship through the maze of docking structures until they reached the assigned bay and sat down with a gentle thump that spoke of his skill as a pilot. Despite limited experience with this particular vessel, as the engines powered down, he could see through the viewport that dozens of beings from species he recognized, and many he did not, were gathering to watch the new arrivals, with expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion. The airlock cycled open and Marcus stepped out first, with Lyra close behind him as they faced the assembled crowd of escaped slaves. who had built a new life here in the hidden corners of the galaxy. An elderly Thraxian shuffled forward, leaning heavily on a walking stick that looked like it had been crafted from some kind of crystalline material that glowed softly with internal light. "I am Elder Vexstock," the Thraxian said, in a voice that carried surprising strength despite the frailty of his aged body. "I speak for the council that governs Haven Station and coordinates underground activities across 17 sectors. Bring grave news, we are told, so please share what you know so we may judge how to respond to this new threat." Marcus and Lyra spent the next 2 hours explaining everything they had discovered about Project Terminus, while the council members listened with expressions that grew increasingly grim as the full scope of the Krathix plans became clear. When they finished speaking, Elder Vexstock was quiet for a long moment before finally responding in measured tones. "This weapon must be stopped before it becomes operational," he said with absolute certainty. "If the Krathix gain the ability to destroy star systems at will, then all hope for freedom dies with the billions of innocents who will be held hostage by their threats. The Underground has been preparing for direct action against the Empire, but we have never attempted anything on the scale that this situation demands. And let us help you plan and execute the mission," Marcus said firmly. "Lyra knows their systems better than anyone, and I have military experience that could be useful in coordinating an attack on the weapons facility." A Crolian female with scars covering half her face stepped forward from the crowd and fixed Marcus with an intense stare from her remaining good eye. "Why would a human help escaped slaves fight against his own allies? The Krathix. And your people have treaties and shared military operations. You gain nothing from betraying them, except becoming a hunted fugitive yourself." "I am already a fugitive," Marcus replied, meeting her gaze without flinching. "And the Krathix stopped being my allies the moment I learned they built their empire on the suffering of enslaved beings. Humans believe in freedom and dignity for all sentient life, and we do not compromise on those principles no matter the political cost." Something flickered in the Crolian woman's scarred face that might have been respect, or perhaps just recognition that Marcus truly meant what he said. She nodded once and stepped back into the crowd while others began murmuring among themselves in dozens of different languages that Marcus's translator struggled to process all at once. "The human speaks truth," another voice called out from somewhere in the back. "We have all heard the stories about humans and their strange ideas that everyone deserves freedom regardless of strength or usefulness. They fought wars on their own world to end slavery, and they won those wars through sheer stubborn refusal to accept that some beings are meant to be property of others." More voices joined in agreement, and Marcus felt surprised by the realization that humans had apparently become legendary figures in the underground network. Their species was barely 100 years into galactic society, and already their reputation for opposing slavery had spread through the hidden channels where escaped slaves communicated and supported each other across vast distances. Elder Vexstock raised one clawed hand for silence, and the crowd immediately quieted out of obvious respect for his authority and wisdom. "The council will deliberate on this matter, but I believe I speak for all of us when I say that we welcome Marcus, Chen, and Lyra of the Velkari as honored members of our community. You have both sacrificed much to stand against tyranny, and that earns you a place among those who fight for freedom." The crowd erupted in cheers, and Marcus found himself surrounded by beings pressing forward to shake his hand or touch his shoulder, in gestures of solidarity that transcended language and species barriers. Lyra stood beside him, smiling with tears streaming down her blue cheeks as she experienced what Marcus realized must be her first true welcome among people who saw her as an equal rather than as property or a tool to be used. Over the following days, Marcus and Lyra worked closely with the Underground Council to develop a plan for attacking the hidden Krathix weapons facility. They studied the partial coordinates and technical specifications that Lyra had stolen from the slave registry and compared them against intelligence reports that the Underground had gathered through their own network of spies and informants embedded throughout Krathix-controlled space. Marcus was amazed by the sophistication of the Underground organization. What he had imagined as a loose collection of escaped slaves turned out to be a highly coordinated resistance movement with cells operating on hundreds of worlds. They had Agents in Krathik's military installations, government offices, and even among the slave overseers themselves, who were often just slaves promoted to positions of limited authority in exchange for keeping others in line. We have been sabotaging the Krathiks for years, Elder Vexstock explained during one planning session. Small acts of resistance that slow their expansion and create doubt in their systems. A weapons shipment that arrives with defective components. A surveillance network that experiences mysterious failures at critical moments. Supply chains that develop inexplicable bottlenecks. Each action alone is insignificant, but together they create friction that prevents the Empire from operating at full efficiency. You have been preparing for something bigger, Lyra observed, as she studied the organizational charts and resource lists the Council had shared with them. All of this infrastructure and coordination is not just for small-scale sabotage, but for a major offensive operation when the time is right. We have been waiting for the right moment and the right target, the scarred Crolian woman admitted. Her name was Sergeant Kira, and Marcus had learned she was the Underground's military commander with experience, leading combat operations on a dozen different worlds before her capture and eventual escape from Krathik's slavery. Project Terminus gives us both. If we can destroy that weapon and expose what the Krathiks were planning to the galactic community, then we deal a blow to their reputation and legitimacy that will inspire resistance. Across their entire empire, the planning continued late into the station's artificial night cycle as they worked. Through tactical scenarios and logistical challenges, the weapons facility was located deep in Krathik's controlled space, protected by multiple layers of security and defense platforms. Getting close enough to attack it would require stealth and deception on a massive scale that pushed the Underground's capabilities to their absolute limits. We have one advantage they do not expect, Marcus said as an idea began forming in his mind. They believe the Underground is just a collection of escaped slaves hiding in remote corners of space. They do not know about your organization or your true capabilities. That gives us the element of surprise if we use it wisely. What are you proposing? Elder Vexstock asked with interest clear in his ancient eyes. We pretend to be exactly what they think we are, Marcus explained as the plan took shape. A small group of fugitives, desperate and poorly equipped, trying to steal supplies from their facility. They will see us as a minor nuisance, not worth deploying their full defensive capabilities. That gives our real strike force the opening they need to infiltrate and plant explosives in critical systems while the Krathiks' attention is focused on the obvious threat. Sergeant Kira studied the tactical displays with growing excitement. A feint, followed by the real attack. Classic military strategy, but it requires perfect timing and coordination between both groups. If the diversionary team gets captured or killed before the strike force is in position, then the entire operation fails. Then we make sure that does not happen, Marcus said, with more confidence than he actually felt. Lyra and I will lead the diversionary team since we are the ones the Krathiks most want to capture. They will not be able to resist the opportunity to reclaim us, and that obsession will blind them to the real danger until it is too late. Lyra grabbed his arm with surprising force, and when Marcus looked at her, he saw fear mixed with determination. In those violet eyes he had come to know so well. You are proposing that we walk directly into a Krathik's military facility and hope they do not kill us immediately. That is an insane plan. All the best plans are a little bit insane, Marcus replied with a slight smile. Besides, I made you a promise when we first met that we would break your chains together. I intend to keep that promise by making sure no one else has to wear chains like the ones you escaped from. Are you with me? Lyra stared at him for a long moment, and Marcus could see the internal struggle playing out across her expressive features as she weighed the risks against the potential rewards of success. Then finally, she nodded and spoke in a voice that was steady, despite the fear he knew she must be feeling. I am with you, she said simply. Let us go break some more chains and maybe save the galaxy while we are at it. The council voted unanimously to approve the operation and immediately began mobilizing resources from across their network. Ships that had been hidden for years emerged from secret docks. Weapons that had been carefully smuggled and stockpiled were distributed to volunteers who would make up the strike force. Intelligence flowed in from agents throughout Krathic space, providing real-time updates on security patrols and defensive positions. Marcus spent his remaining time on Haven Station training with the strike team and refining the tactical plan down to the smallest details. He worked closely with Sergeant Kira, who taught him underground combat techniques that emphasized speed and adaptability over raw firepower. Lyra, meanwhile, worked with the technical specialists to ensure they understood the complex systems they would need to disable once inside the weapons facility. On the final night, before they departed, Marcus stood alone on an observation deck looking out at the stars, scattered across the void like diamonds on black velvet. He thought about how his life had changed so dramatically in just a few short weeks since waking up in that medical bay to find Lyra kneeling in his quarters as property given by an alien warlord. Having second thoughts? Lyra asked as she joined him at the viewport. No second thoughts, Marcus replied honestly. Just reflecting on how far we have both come and how much further we still have to go. A month ago, I was just a soldier following orders, and you were a slave with no hope for a better future. Now we are about to lead an attack on the most heavily defended weapons facility in Krathic space, with nothing but faith and determination on our side. And allies, Lyra added softly. We have allies now, Marcus. People who believe in the same things we do, and who are willing to fight beside us for freedom. That is more than either of us had before, and it makes all the difference in the world. Marcus reached out and took her hand in his own, feeling the warmth of her blue skin against his palm. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars and preparing themselves mentally for the battle that awaited them in the coming days. Tomorrow they would launch the most dangerous operation in underground history. Tomorrow they would strike directly at the heart of Krathic's power and either deal a devastating blow to the Aziz Empire or die trying. But tonight they were just two people who had found unexpected friendship and purpose in the vast darkness of space, where hope burned bright. Like the stars themselves against impossible odds, the human soldier woke up to find his unexpected reward, a beautiful alien slave, Part 5, Revolution's Dawn. Krathic's weapons facility hung in space like a mechanical spider with its legs spreading out in all directions, connecting the central hub. 2 dozens of construction platforms and defensive installations that bristled with enough firepower to level a small fleet. Marcus studied it through the viewport of their stolen cargo hauler, while sweat dripped down his back, despite the cool temperature inside the ship, as his heart hammered against his ribs with nervous anticipation. This is actually happening, he muttered to himself as much as to Lyra, who sat beside him, running final checks on their equipment and weapons. We are really going to fly directly into the most secure Krathic's military facility in this sector and hope our insane plan actually works. Too late for second thoughts now? Lyra replied with a smile that did not quite reach her violet eyes, which were focused and serious. The strike team is already in position, waiting for our signal, and Sergeant Kira will have our heads. If we back out at this point after all the resources they committed to this operation. Marcus took a deep breath and activated the communication system, sending out the identification codes that marked them as a slave transport vessel bringing new workers to replace those who had died during construction accidents. The codes were genuine, having been stolen by underground agents weeks ago specifically for this mission, but using them was still incredibly risky because one wrong detail could expose them instantly. Cargo. Hauler designation 749, this is facility security. A bored voice responded after several tense seconds. Transmit your manifest and prepare for inspection. Upon docking at Platform 12, Marcus sent the falsified manifest while Lyra worked frantically to spoof their biometric signatures, so they would register as Thraxian overseers rather than the human and Valkyrie fugitives that every Krathic soldier in the Empire was hunting. The technology was cutting edge and had been refined over years of underground operations, but it was not perfect in there. There was always a chance that deception would fail at the worst possible moment. The cargo hauler passed through the outer defensive perimeter without incident, and Marcus felt a tiny bit of tension release from his shoulders as they approached the docking platform. Around them, he could see other ships moving back and forth, carrying supplies and personnel while construction crews worked on the massive central structure that housed Project Terminus in its final stages of completion. According to the intelligence reports we have maybe 6 hours before, they run the final activation sequence, Lyra said quietly as she checked the chronometer. If we cannot disable the weapon by then, it will become operational, and the Krathiks will have the power to hold the entire galaxy hostage. Down with a gentle thump, and Marcus grabbed the forged credentials that would identify them as legitimate overseers authorized to inspect the slave workforce. He caught Lyra's eye and saw his own determination reflected back at him in those depths that had come to mean so much over the past weeks of running and fighting together as partners. He asked simply. Ready, she confirmed. They walked down the loading ramp into chaos as slaves of dozens of different species hurried back and forth carrying equipment and materials under the watchful eyes of Krathik's guards who carried shock weapons designed to inflict maximum pain without causing death or permanent injury. The sight made Marcus's blood boil with rage, but he forced himself to maintain the cold expression of an overseer who saw these beings as nothing more than tools to be used and discarded a Krathik supervisor. Approached them with datapad in hand and suspicious eyes scanning their false credentials with the practiced paranoia of someone who had dealt with smugglers and saboteurs before. I was not informed of any inspection scheduled for today. What is the purpose of your visit? Random quality control check ordered by High Command, Marcus said in the clipped tones of someone who expected obedience without question. There have been reports of defective components being installed in critical systems, and we are here to verify that your workforce is maintaining proper standards. The supervisor's scales rippled with annoyance at the implied criticism, but he could not refuse without risking his own position, so he gestured for them to follow him into the facility. Very well, but I assure you that my oversight of the workforce has been exemplary, and any defects are the fault of the slaves themselves who deliberately sabotage their work when they think they can get away with it. Marcus and Lyra followed the supervisor deeper into the facility while their eyes scanned constantly for the locations of critical systems and security checkpoints that matched what they had memorized from the stolen schematics. They needed to create a convincing distraction that would draw as many guards as possible away from the sections where the underground strike team would be infiltrating through ventilation systems. Too small for Krathik's bodies, but perfectly sized for smaller species. The main reactor chamber was exactly where the intelligence reports had indicated it would be. Through reinforced windows, Marcus could see the massive power core that fed energy to Project Terminus and all the associated systems that kept the weapon functional. If they could disable that reactor, then the weapon would be dead in the water, at least temporarily, while repairs were made. We need to inspect that reactor more closely, Marcus announced to the supervisor in authoritative tones. About power fluctuations that could indicate structural weakness in the containment fields. The supervisor looked torn between his duty to cooperate with overseers and his desire to protect his own territory from interference. Finally, professional caution won out, and he led them toward the reactor access corridor while Marcus sent a coded signal through his hidden communicator to let Sergeant Kira know they were in position for the next phase. The explosion came without warning, as the diversionary charges that Marcus and Lyra had smuggled in activated simultaneously at points throughout the facility, causing alarms to blare and guards to rush toward the apparent threats. In the confusion, Marcus and Lyra dropped their overseer disguises and began moving with purpose toward the reactor chamber while pulling out weapons they had concealed beneath their clothing. Intruders in Sector 7 voices screamed over communication systems. Fugitives Marcus Chen and Lyra Velkari have been spotted near the reactor chamber. All units converge on that location immediately, exactly as planned the Krathiks were, falling for the bait and abandoning their posts throughout the facility to capture the two most wanted fugitives in the Empire. This would give the underground strike team the openings they needed to reach their objectives and plant explosives on the weapon itself, along with the central computer systems that controlled everything. Marcus and Lyra fought their way through corridors filled with guards, while energy bolts sizzled past, their heads close enough to feel the heat on their skin. They were hopelessly outnumbered, and Marcus knew they could not keep this up for much longer before being overwhelmed. But they just needed to buy enough time for the strike team to complete their mission. Aka! Look out, Lyra screamed, and he dove sideways as a massive Krathic soldier lunged at him with claws extended. The alien was fast, but Marcus was faster, rolling beneath the attack and coming up with his weapon firing at point-blank range into the vulnerable joints of the soldier's armor. The Krathics went down with a roar of pain and rage, but 3 more immediately took his place. They were forced back step by step until their backs were literally against a wall with nowhere left to retreat. Marcus grabbed Lyra's hand and squeezed. Once as he prepared himself for the end, knowing that at least they had given the strike team their chance, even if they would not live to see whether the mission succeeded. Then suddenly the lights throughout the entire facility flickered and died, plunging everything into darkness, broken only by emergency lighting that cast eerie red shadows across the walls. The Krathics guards hesitated in confusion, and Marcus heard through his communicator the voice of Sergeant Kira shouting in triumph. Charges placed and detonating in 30 seconds. All underground forces evacuate immediately. Marcus did not hesitate, grabbing Lyra and running toward the nearest escape pod bay while counting down the seconds in his head. Behind them he could hear Krathic soldiers recovering from their confusion and giving chase, but Marcus poured every ounce of energy into his legs, driving them forward through corridors he had memorized from the schematics. 20 seconds. They burst into the escape pod bay to find it already filled with freed slaves who the underground team had released during the chaos. Dozens of beings from species Marcus recognized, and many he did not, were cramming themselves into the small pods designed for emergency evacuation. 15 seconds. Get in, Sergeant Kira shouted from inside one of the pods as she waved them over frantically. Marcus shoved Lyra through the hatch first, then threw himself in behind her as the door sealed with a hiss of pressurizing air. 10 seconds. The pod launched with brutal acceleration that crushed Marcus against the cramped interior walls as they shot away from the facility at maximum speed. Through the small viewport, he could see other pods launching in all directions, like seeds scattering from a dying plant. 5 seconds. The facility exploded in a ball of fire so bright that it burned after images into Marcus's retinas, even through the protective viewport. The shockwave hit their pod and sent it tumbling end over end through space until the automatic stabilizers finally regained control and stopped the sickening rotation. When Marcus could finally think clearly again, he looked around the cramped interior of the pod and did a quick count. 8 beings total, including himself, Lyra, and Sergeant Kira. All of them were battered and bruised, but alive, which was more than he had dared hope for when they launched this insane operation. "Did we get it?" Marcus asked breathlessly. "Is Project Terminus destroyed?" Completely obliterated, Sergeant Kira confirmed with savage satisfaction in her scarred face. "We planted enough explosives to level a small moon, and every data core that contained information about the weapon design was wiped clean. The Krathics will have to start from scratch if they want to build another one, and now the entire galaxy knows what they were planning, thanks to the information we transmitted to every major news network and government simultaneously with the explosion." Over the following days, as they made their way back to Haven Station in ships sent to retrieve the escape pods, Marcus watched in amazement as the galaxy reacted to the revelation of Project Terminus. The Galactic Council convened emergency sessions, while species that had been allies of the Krathics began distancing themselves from an empire that had been willing to threaten everyone with genocide. Protests erupted on Krathics-controlled worlds as subject populations demanded freedom and an end to the slave system that had enabled such horrors. But the most shocking development came when High Commander Vortak himself appeared in a public broadcast to announce sweeping reforms, including the gradual abolition of slavery. Throughout the Empire over the next 10 standard years, Marcus did not believe for a second that Vortak had experienced some moral awakening, but rather understood that political reality had shifted beneath the commander's feet, and he was scrambling to maintain power by appearing to embrace change. "It is not perfect," Elder Vexstock said during the celebration that took place on Haven Station, when all the strike team members had been confirmed alive and accounted for. 10 years is far too long for those who suffer in chains right now. But it is a beginning, and that is more than we had before your actions sparked this revolution. Marcus stood with Lyra watching as freed slaves danced and sang in dozens of languages, celebrating their victory over an empire that had seemed invincible just weeks ago. He felt exhausted down to his bones, but also filled with a sense of accomplishment that he had never experienced even in his military career fighting in conventional wars. "What happens now?" Lyra asked quietly, as she leaned against him in a way that felt natural after everything they had been through together. "The Krathiks will still hunt us even with their reforms. We'll never be able to return to normal lives. We make new lives here with the underground," Marcus replied as he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "We keep fighting to ensure those reforms actually happen, and that no one else has to experience what you went through. Humans have a saying that eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. I think we just signed up to pay that price for as long as it takes." 3 months later, Marcus stood in a meeting chamber on Haven Station that had been hastily converted into something resembling a diplomatic conference room. Representatives from a dozen species sat around a circular table, including several humans from Earth's diplomatic corps, who had traveled all this way specifically to meet with him and the underground leadership. The Galactic Council has officially recognized the underground as a legitimate advocacy organization for escaped slaves and former slave populations, Ambassador Williams announced with barely concealed pride in her voice. Furthermore, they have established an oversight committee to monitor Krathiks' compliance with their promised reforms and ensure that slavery is actually being abolished according to the agreed timeline. "What about Marcus and Lyra Elder?" Vexstock asked pointedly. "The Krathiks have not withdrawn the arrest warrants or fugitive declarations, despite all the political changes." Ambassador Williams smiled and produced a datapad, which she slid across the table toward Marcus. "Earth Command has reviewed your actions and determined that you were operating within the moral authority granted to all human military personnel to oppose slavery and crimes against sentient dignity. You are hereby reinstated to active duty with full honors and offered a position as official liaison between humanity and the underground. The Krathiks have been informed that any attempt to arrest you will be treated as an act of aggression against Earth itself." Marcus stared at the datapad, feeling emotions warring inside him. He had accepted that he would spend the rest of his life as a fugitive hunted by authorities and never able to return home. Now suddenly he was being offered redemption and recognition for what he had done. And Lyra, he asked, because her fate mattered to him far more than his own. What about her status? The Valkyrie government in exile has formally requested her assistance in rebuilding their world's defense infrastructure when it is eventually liberated from Krathiks. "Control," Ambassador Williams said gently. "But in the meantime, she has been granted asylum by Earth and full citizenship if she chooses to accept it. She will be free to live and work wherever she wishes without fear of recapture." Lyra sat beside Marcus with tears streaming down her blue cheeks as the full weight of what was being offered finally sank in. True freedom, not just escape from chains, but actual legal recognition as a person with rights and dignity. It was more than she had ever dared to dream possible. "I accept," she said in a voice that shook with emotion. "And I choose to continue working with Marcus and the underground to ensure that what happened to my people and so many others never happens." Again, the months that followed were filled with intense activity as Marcus and Lyra worked together to establish formal cooperation between the underground network and various galactic governments, who were finally willing to take action against slavery. They traveled to liberated worlds, helping former slaves rebuild their lives and their societies. They trained resistance cells on planets still under Krathiks' control, teaching them the tactics and strategies that had proven effective, and slowly, steadily, the number of free beings grew while the number of slaves decreased as the pressure continued. Building on the Krathiks' empire from all sides, it was not perfect, and there were setbacks along the way, including violent resistance from hardline Krathiks commanders who refused to accept the changes. But the overall trajectory was unmistakable toward a future where slavery would be nothing more than a dark chapter in galactic history. 1 year after the destruction of Project Terminus, Marcus and Lyra stood together on the observation deck of Haven Station, looking out at a small fleet of ships that carried the first wave of official humanitarian aid to former Krathic slave colonies. It represented an investment of resources that would have been unthinkable before their actions had sparked this revolution in thinking and policy. "Do you ever regret it?" Lyra asked softly. "Everything you gave up when you decided to help one slave girl escape from chains?" Marcus thought about that question carefully before answering because it deserved honesty. He had given up a comfortable military career and the safety of following orders. He had become a fugitive and nearly died more times than he could count. He had made powerful enemies and would probably never be completely safe for the rest of his life. "No regrets," he said finally, as he turned to look at Lyra and saw in her violet eyes all the reasons why his choice had been the right one. "I made a promise to you that we would break your chains together, and in doing so, we helped break the chains on millions of others. That is worth any price." Lyra smiled and reached out to take his hand in hers. "Then let us continue keeping that promise for as long as it takes. There are still too many people in chains across this galaxy, and they need someone to believe in their freedom even when they have lost hope themselves," agreed Marcus said as he squeezed her hand gently. "Besides, someone has to make sure the humans maintain their reputation as the crazy species that believes everyone deserves freedom, regardless of strength or usefulness. Might as well be us." They stood together watching the ships depart on their mission of mercy and hope, while around them, Haven Station bustled with activity as the underground continued its transformation from a hidden resistance network into a legitimate force for change in galactic society. The fight was far from over and would probably continue for generations to come, but for the first time since, Marcus had woken up in that medical bay to find Lyra kneeling in his quarters as unwanted property. He felt genuine hope that they were winning not just individual battles, but the larger war for the soul of galactic civilization itself. And that hope, born from one human's refusal to accept that another being could be property, would continue spreading like ripples across still water, touching lives and changing hearts until the day came when slavery was truly abolished everywhere, and all beings could live in freedom and dignity as equals. That was the promise Marcus and Lyra had made to each other and to everyone who still suffered in chains. And it was a promise they would keep fighting to fulfill together for as long as breath remained in their bodies and hope burned bright in their hearts against the darkness.